Hi, I'm Josh Vincent, and I'm back to finish our seminar on land value taxation, how it's implemented, how you can advocate for it, how you can educate people on the subject. And we're going to get probably into the hard details right now of how we actually implement this. Last night we left with my cute little illustration, and I think we proved that other forms of tax are simply self-defeating, and especially in a city like New York. What is land value taxation? And it is a tax on land, and hopefully no buildings, and hopefully no income, no sales, no business, no franchise tax, nothing. And very simply, it's a tax policy. It's a public policy adopted by government at any level. In the United States, it's at the municipal, school district, or county level. People will be surprised to hear that we have a land value tax in 2 counties in Hawaii, which most people don't know. And interestingly, after statehood, Hawaii had a statewide land value tax. And it was eventually overturned due to the request of resort owners who had lots of beachfront property and did not want to build up and high. They wanted to keep low. And also the farmers in Hawaii were opposed to it. The only supporters of land tax in Hawaii now are Hawaiians, native Hawaiians, because it helps them preserve their land. So that's why Kauai and Maui use the land value tax. So it's a tax policy, but it's also, I think, for New York's purposes, especially community boards and council districts, it's a project driver. And what do I mean by a project driver? You put in infrastructure. How do you pay for it? You can collateralize the cost of the infrastructure by issuing bonds on the land value. That's how Budapest built much of its civic infrastructure in the late 1800s under the Habsburgs. And it was actually put to an end by a revolution by Bolsheviks in 1919, and they never went back to it. There were some land value tax council members who were actually shot during that revolt in 1920. So it shows we're on the right side of history if you get shot. Value capture is a policy that land value tax sort of umbrellas and overarches. Land value capture, when you put out a subway system and you open up a stop, the land values go up. The Second Avenue subway is going to be, I insist, a great example of that. And we've seen how Robert Moses building that network of parkways on Long Island helped people drive out to the suburbs and leave New York City, unfortunately. It's a policy driver because the markets feel free to come back to places they haven't been for years or places that have never been accessible. It brings market investment in. Another thing that land value tax does is reward, and I think this is important, and we've forgotten it in a lot of our major cities, sweat equity. And sweat equity is the very basic act of you yourself rolling up your sleeves, fixing up your property, and not getting punished for your temerity in improving your own living situation. And finally, land value tax is a model of several things that are very important to tax experts, and that's tax efficiency. You can't hide a land value tax. You can hide the value, and as we've discussed in New York City, the government at times has done a good job of hiding the land value as far as the assessments. But you can still not avoid it, and you can't run away from it. It's also a model of economic efficiency. In other words, if you're a business person and you have to fill out 25 forms to do your taxes, just your small business taxes. It's an economic drag on a business. I was dining with a colleague this morning at the Greek Corner Diner, which is at the corner of 28th Street and 7th Avenue. It's been there since 1980. And we were talking taxes with the owner, and I said, I bet this guy knows. And I said, how many taxes are there in New York City on business? And we're not talking about Morgan Stanley, Citibank. We're talking about a guy who owns a little coffee shop diner. And he said 47. And imagine how much it costs to be in compliance with New York City tax policy, not to mention New York State tax policy and federal tax policy. So that's why land tax is economically efficient. It's collecting one thing, one bill, and you, the owner, well, you can battle your land value with the assessor, but the land value is what it is. And on the government's end, it's very easy to collect a land value tax. It's the cheapest tax to collect, and it's a sure, direct, and fair way to tax. It's hard to wiggle your way out of a land value tax in that sense. I'm going to quick give you, and in the handouts is included a booklet on the various methods of doing a land value tax. You have to get into the facts. Now, this happens to be the city of New London, Connecticut. But the question always is, what do I set the tax rate at? What's the land value tax? So I'm going to speak Sanskrit, it will seem, for a second. But LTRP is the proposed land tax, and you get that by taking the current property tax and subtracting what your proposed building tax will be. You divide it by the assessments in the town, which one of our students did this morning at his breakfast table. And then you add the current property tax and you get the result that in New London, the land tax would be 30.9 mils or 3.09%, and the building tax would be 22.9 mils or 2.29%. That's revenue neutral. In other words, it brings in the same amount of money to the community that they've been getting before, but it's shifting the source. And that's really what we're trying to do with our first start with land value tax and Georgism. Now, this illustration that you see is really how an easy way to persuade and to educate people on what a land tax is. This is a very important and very valuable vacant lot in Hartford, Connecticut. Hartford, Connecticut used to be one of the richest cities in the United States. It's now one of the poorest cities in the United States. It's on the East Coast. It should be sharing in on the prosperity that the coasts are all enjoying, but it's not. And later on, we'll see why Hartford is such a hard place to do business and to live in. But that's a flat lot, parking lot, very basic. The land value is about right. It's about $3 million for 3/4 of a city block. There used to be a Hilton Hotel there that stood proudly from 1945 to 1989, when Hartford was on the skids. With a land value of $2.7 million, their current property tax for holding this lot, and it's a holding company in Midtown Manhattan, it's $193,000 a year for a lot that's officially worth about $3 million, probably worth a little bit more. So what we want to do is have them pay their fair share, because this is smack dab in the middle of the central business district. There used to be a 15-story building there, and it's been sitting as a pay surface parking lot for all that time. If we had a land value tax, you can see that the tax bill would go up to $1 million a year. Now that's going to make the owners think a little bit. Do you want to have $1 million tax bill a year? The answer is no. Now, the 193 that they're paying right now, we discovered with the Hartford City Council doing research that they pay off, because that's all paid parking, they pay off their property tax bill in about 15 working days in the year. Everything after that is free money. It's cash for not doing anything, for simply letting people park on their land. And that's why you, even in Manhattan, you see surface parking lots that logically shouldn't be there. But people will, of course, pay for the convenience. They don't want to pay the extra expense of going into a garage. And you pay your taxes in no time flat. So if we had somebody that wanted to build a $50 million building that would essentially replace that old Hilton hotel, their tax would still be $1 million a year. But on top of that, they're going to have a hotel with 200 rooms, lots of guests, lots of employees, lots of jobs, and you will also not have this broken tooth on Front Street in Hartford. So if there were no land value tax, the annual property tax would be about $4.5 million a year. And if you think about it, which a developer would, do I want to build in Hartford where my tax will be $4.5 million a year? Or will I go walk across the river to East Hartford and find out that if I put up the same building, my tax will be about $800,000 a year? Same clientele, almost the same location, but being in Hartford, all things being equal, you're not going to go there. So what we're doing is providing the incentive. This is really our sort of standard educational chart that we use. So the rise in the holding cost of that lot incentivizes the landowner to build or sell to somebody who does want to build. And, or as we discussed last night, they'll ask for a subsidy. You know, they'll ask for the government to build the building for them. On the other side of the coin, it's always a sort of a moving operation. The decrease in the tax bill by having a land value tax lets the builder or the developer capitalize his savings into a selling price, allowing for a higher profit per unit, or sell units for less so that you actually have market churn. You actually have real estate transactions. And the secret, and when we talk about Harrisburg later, is that what we're doing as far as urban issues is we're making the city cheaper than the suburbs. And that's been the problem over and over and over. People want to be in New York. People want to be, working people want to be in New York. People wouldn't mind living in Hartford, but it's too expensive. The taxes are too high. I'm going to get into our experience with land value tax. Now, this is Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Harrisburg, Pennsylvania at one time was rated by HUD as the most fiscally distressed and structurally distressed city in the nation, right up with East St. Louis, Illinois. And East St. Louis, Illinois, I've been there, it's no good. It's an awful place. It's been abandoned by everybody except by the poor who can't leave. Harrisburg had a terrible flood in 1975. A lot of the downtown was wiped out. The railroads left. And so we ended up with, as you can see, Market Square by 1982, when the mayor had bankruptcy papers sitting on his desk. You see a bunch of mercantile buildings that are boarded up. You see wood. You see the roofs not looking good. And they enacted a land value tax in 1980. And by 2007, as you can see, if you look at the same picture, same perspective, that there is a brand new Hilton hotel. They had a tax abatement that lasted 5 years, but when the tax abatement came off, their taxes were still very low. So it relates actually to that Hartford illustration. Actually it is a Hilton hotel. And behind the Hilton hotel, you can see, instead of a parking deck, you see an office building with parking. Just to the right of it, you can see another tall modern building. And having Harrisburg, which is off the grid, so to speak, it's away from the East Coast and away from the wealth possibilities of the East Coast, it's doing pretty well. And Harrisburg is also, like Hartford, a state capital. Over half of it is tax exempt, so they need to get revenue in buildings where they can. So how do we measure the success of a land value tax? Just what you saw in the photographs. Are more buildings produced or fixed up when you have a land value tax as opposed to not having a land value tax? Now, we started our work in Pennsylvania during the steel collapse of the mid-1970s. And it started earlier in Pittsburgh and Scranton. But in the late 70s, we would compare analog cities. If I know you don't have your atlases with you, but Scranton and Wilkes-Barre are sister cities. They're very close to each other. They're both about the same size. They both depended on steel, railroads, and coal. And Scranton had fallen apart along with Wilkes-Barre. But when they increased the land value tax and decreased the penalty on construction and investment, the number of taxable building permits increased 3 years after LVT was introduced. What we're doing is comparing years before and years after. In the Monongahela Valley, the Mon Valley near Pittsburgh, you had several communities that had 8,000, 10,000 inhabitants and a steel factory. Steel factories, they're gone. So what was the alternative? The first town to adopt land value tax was McKeesport. 3 years after adopting LVT, their building permit issuance went up 38%. And what's more important is that the two closest cities, Duquesne and Clairton, kept sliding downhill. In fact, most of the building permits were for demolitions. So you actually see construction permits dropping in those towns and going up in the LVT town. And again, these are small steel towns. This is in the Mahoning Valley near the Ohio border. And comparing Newcastle, Farrell, and the city of Sharon, you see the same outcome. What's interesting is that Duquesne and Clairton both adopted the land value tax within 5 years to try and equalize the competition, because cities are in competition with non-city, non-urban areas. And the competition can be leveled by government subsidy or by proactive action to change your tax structure. And they do both. Again, we'll go back to Harrisburg. We're going to talk about residential building permits. I'm from Albany, New York, which is another state capital, which has tons of exempt property because it is the state capital. And it's been in decline, like Harrisburg, like Hartford, like Trenton, like Roanoke, or Richmond, I'm sorry, you can go on and on. After Harrisburg expanded its land value tax to the current level of 7-to-1, the ratio of land to building tax, you can see that per capita, the residential building permits overtook Albany dramatically, and they have been ahead of Albany ever since. Now, if you think about the geography of economics, where would you rather be? You'd rather be, all things being equal, in Albany. It's closer to New York. It's closer to the cultural and economic advantages of the East Coast. Harrisburg is stuck in the middle of the country, so to speak. We discussed yesterday the cleavage of Pennsylvania, of urbanized Philly and Pittsburgh, and Harrisburg in the middle. So all things being equal, people are not moving into the area of Harrisburg. They're moving into Harrisburg because it's cheaper than the suburbs now. And that's I think, a very important issue to always keep in mind and think about why this works. Another reason that land value tax is, we believe, a good idea is because throughout the recent history of older American cities and communities, revenues have been dropping. And when revenues drop, what do? If you're the mayor of Baltimore, you raise taxes. And so you start a spiral of higher taxes due to lower revenues because people are moving out, people are disinvesting in the community, there's no incentive to build in the community, and that goes down. So when that goes down, all of those factors, taxes are going to go up. And it continues the process. It's the snake eating its tail. Now, Altoona, since 2001, has had a land value tax. It doesn't have any advantages. It's stuck in the middle of a rural, forgotten, abandoned area. It used to be the home of the Pennsylvania Railroad, where they made the steam engines. That's all gone. It's not coming back. But the trend of revenues has been going steadily upwards since they advocated for land value tax and adopted land value tax. They were facing state receivership, and they're out of it. They've graduated because their property tax revenues are stable and even increasing. As they untax buildings, you get more buildings, and if you untax buildings, you create land value because you're getting rid of that loss, that deadweight loss. So there's a little map just to show you where the land value tax is used, and it's used all over the state of Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, mostly in steel country and what used to be coal country. All the way from, there's a little borough called Millbourne, and places like Scranton, Titusville, Oil City, and they have various rates of land value tax. It's a very flexible tax. Some towns have no tax on buildings, some towns tax land at about 4 times the rate of building. It's really flexible and adjustable. And of course, we keep persuading these towns to reduce the tax on buildings.